Have you ever had the strange feeling that you're running late, even when nobody ever told you what time you were supposed to arrive? It's difficult to explain. Nothing dramatic has happened. You might be paying your bills, showing up to work, doing everything life asks of you. Yet some quiet part of you keeps whispering, I should be further ahead than this. That thought doesn't usually appear during your busiest moments. It finds you while you're driving home in silence, when someone casually asks, so, what's new with you? Or when an old class reunion invitation appears, and, for reasons you can't quite explain, you decide not to go. You don't always avoid those moments because of other people. Sometimes you avoid them because you don't want to measure yourself. And here's something most people never notice. The feeling of being behind can exist even when you have no idea where you're actually trying to go. Think about that for a second. How can you feel late for a destination you've never clearly defined? That's the first clue that something deeper is happening. Most people assume the pressure comes from unfinished goals. But what if the pressure was there long before the goals? What if your mind isn't comparing your life to reality, but to an invisible schedule you've quietly carried for years? That would explain something almost everyone has experienced. Two people can have the same job, the same income, even similar lives. One feels hopeful. The other feels like they're losing a race nobody else can even see. The circumstances are nearly identical. The experience couldn't be more different. Which means the pain isn't coming from the facts alone. It's coming from the story those facts are being placed inside. And stories are powerful because they quietly shape what we notice, what we fear, and what we believe is still possible. But this invisible timeline raises a much bigger question. If the clock in your head isn't completely real, who put it there? Because the answer isn't just about feeling behind. It may explain why some people spend years chasing a life that was never truly theirs to begin with. So who placed that invisible clock in your mind? Part of the answer begins much earlier than most people realize. Long before you chose a career, a relationship, or any version of success, you quietly learned what a successful life was supposed to look like. Family, school, friends, culture. Each added another piece until the picture felt so familiar that you stopped questioning whether it actually belonged to you. That's why some people reach the milestones they spent years chasing and still feel strangely disconnected from their own lives. At first, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't getting what you wanted make the feeling disappear? Unless the life you were building was never truly your own. Imagine wearing clothes that almost fit. From a distance, nobody notices anything wrong. But all day, something feels slightly uncomfortable. You keep adjusting, convincing yourself you'll eventually get used to it. Many people live that way for years. Here's the contradiction most never expect. The mind can tolerate failure longer than it can tolerate living a life that feels borrowed. Failure hurts. Misalignment quietly empties you. That's why some people keep changing direction without fully understanding why. They assume they're indecisive, restless, or difficult to satisfy, when something much quieter is happening beneath the surface. An inner compass keeps detecting a direction that doesn't feel true. The strange thing about a compass is that it never argues. It doesn't force you to turn. It simply refuses to stop pointing north, no matter how many times you walk the other way. That's why ignoring it rarely brings peace. It only makes the signal easier to doubt and yourself harder to trust. From the outside, other people may see inconsistency. Inside, it feels like carrying a map that never matches the road everyone insists you should follow. Eventually, many people stop trusting that feeling altogether. They assume something must be wrong with them instead of questioning the path they're walking. But that raises an even deeper question. If your mind can slowly learn a life that doesn't belong to you, where did your idea of who you are come from in the first place? Because that answer explains why protecting your identity can become more important than discovering your potential. So where does that borrowed identity come from? For many people, it begins with something that once felt like praise. Maybe you were the smart one, the naturally talented one, the reliable one, the person who always seemed to have potential. At first, those labels feel encouraging. Over time, they can quietly become something else. A role you become afraid to lose. Picture someone sitting in front of a laptop late at night. The application is finished. Every question has been answered. The cursor hovers over the submit button. Nothing is left to change. Then, almost without thinking, they close the laptop. Tomorrow feels safer. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't care. Because once they press that button, they'll receive something they've managed to avoid for a very long time. Reality. Until that moment, they can still believe, I probably could have succeeded. Reality asks a different question. Let's find out. That single click doesn't just test the application. It tests the story they've been telling themselves about who they are. And that's why the hesitation feels so much bigger than it should. Here's the psychological twist most people never notice. They aren't avoiding failure. They avoiding information. Information that might confirm they're capable. Information that might prove they still have more to learn. Or information that could force them to let go of an identity they've carried for years. For a few moments after closing the laptop, there's relief. The uncertainty has been postponed. But later that night, another feeling quietly replaces it. Not panic, regret. The opportunity is still there, yet something inside them already knows they walked away from more than an application. They walked away from the chance to discover whether the old story about themselves was actually true. And that's how an identity protects itself. Not by refusing success, by avoiding experiences that could rewrite it. The strangest part is that this protection rarely looks dramatic. It disguises itself as caution, overthinking, waiting for better timing, or just one more week. Which means the behaviors keeping people stuck often don't feel like avoidance at all. They feel completely reasonable. And that's exactly what makes them so difficult to recognize. If protecting your identity feels reasonable, how would you ever recognize it? That's the problem. Your mind rarely protects you in obvious ways. It prefers disguises, patterns that look responsible on the surface while quietly preserving the story you've been carrying about yourself. One of them begins with a sentence almost everyone has said. I'll think about it. At first, that sounds wise. And sometimes it is. But have you noticed how certain decisions never seem to reach the end of that thinking process? A difficult conversation. A medical appointment you've delayed for months. A choice you've replayed so many times that imagining it has started to feel like making progress. The moment you postpone it, something surprising happens. Relief. The pressure disappears. For a while. Then, later that evening, a quieter feeling arrives. Guilt. Most people believe they're trapped by procrastination. Sometimes they're trapped by becoming addicted to that brief moment of relief. Here's where it becomes even stranger. The mind doesn't always protect your comfort. Sometimes it protects your hope. As long as you never fully commit, every future remains available. Every possibility stays alive. You never have to discover which version of yourself is real. It feels safer to protect unlimited potential than to exchange it for one imperfect reality. But there's a hidden cost. A life made entirely of possibilities can never become a life that's actually lived. And beneath both of those disguises sits the deepest one of all. Your mind would often rather preserve a familiar identity than risk building a truer one. That's why people can stay in situations they've already outgrown. Not because they believe they're happy. Because the familiar story, however limiting, feels less frightening than writing a new one from scratch. This is the twist almost nobody sees. Every disguise offers a reward. Relief. Hope. Familiarity. That's why they're so convincing. But every reward quietly asks for the same price. Another piece of your future. Which means the real battle was never between success and failure. It has always been between self-protection and self-trust. And once you understand that difference, everything you've believed about confidence begins to change. By now, it may seem like every problem we've uncovered has a different cause. The invisible timeline. The borrowed identity. The disguises your mind wears. But they all quietly point back to the same relationship. The one you have with yourself. Think about someone who repeatedly breaks their promises to you. At first, you believe them. Then you become cautious. Eventually, you stop expecting them to follow through at all. The friendship doesn't end with one betrayal. It fades through accumulated evidence. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. When was the last time you believed your own promises with complete confidence? That question surprises many people because they realize the doubt they feel isn't aimed at the world. It's aimed at themselves. Maybe you promised to begin something on Monday. Maybe you kept telling yourself, next month will be different. Eventually, those promises stop sounding hopeful. They begin sounding familiar. This is the hidden shift most people never notice. The biggest thing you lose after breaking enough promises isn't motivation. It's trust. And without trust, your brain starts protecting you from your own expectations. It quietly lowers them so disappointment hurts less. That's why confidence often disappears long before opportunities do. Real confidence isn't built by positive thinking. It's built when your mind gathers enough evidence to believe one simple sentence. When I make a promise to myself, I usually keep it. Every kept promise becomes another vote for that identity. Every broken one teaches the opposite lesson. Here's the emotional twist. The future version of you isn't waiting somewhere ahead. That person is quietly watching every decision you make today, learning whether you're someone they can rely on. In a strange way, you're becoming both the guide and the stranger. Every action either introduces your future self to someone dependable or someone they no longer expect to show up. The relationship becomes stronger or weaker long before your circumstances ever change. And maybe that's why so many people feel disconnected from the person they hoped to become. Not because they lacked ability, because trust slowly disappeared before they even noticed it was leaving. So if rebuilding your life isn't really about finding more motivation, what is the smallest change that convinces your mind to trust you again? That's the final piece of the puzzle. So where does the cycle finally break? It doesn't begin with a sudden burst of confidence. It doesn't happen because one morning you finally feel ready. The change begins much more quietly than that. It begins the moment you stop asking your mind to predict your future and start giving it new evidence instead. Your brain has never built your identity from your intentions. It builds it from patterns. Every action becomes evidence. Every avoided action becomes evidence too. For years, your mind has been collecting the same message. When something feels uncertain, we step back. Eventually, hesitation stops feeling like something you do. It starts feeling like someone you are. That's the hidden thread connecting everything we've explored. Behavior quietly negotiates with identity. Most people believe identity comes first and behavior follows. But the opposite is happening all the time. Your mind watches what you repeatedly do, then writes a story that explains those actions. After enough repetition, that story begins to feel like your personality, even though it was built from hundreds of ordinary moments you barely noticed. That's why waiting rarely creates readiness. Waiting simply gives yesterday's evidence another chance to become tomorrow's identity. One honest action interrupts that cycle, not because it instantly changes your life, because it introduces a fact your old story can't fully explain. Once your brain sees new evidence, it has to begin rewriting its predictions. That's how identities change. Not through inspiration, through accumulated proof. Maybe that's why people who succeed later in life often seem different. Their confidence isn't built on imagined potential anymore. It's built on evidence that survived reality. Now think back to where this journey began. The invisible waiting room. It was never a place. It was a story. A story that convinced you your real life would begin after you became successful enough, certain enough, or worthy enough. But stories only survive while they're being repeated. Imagine standing in front of a door you've walked past for years. Every day you assume it's locked. You picture what might be waiting on the other side, then quietly walk away. One ordinary day, almost without thinking, you reach for the handle. The door opens effortlessly. The door never changed. The lock never changed. The only thing that changed was the story. And maybe that's the final psychological twist. Two people can live through the same difficult decade. Both fail. Both change direction. Both spend years wondering whether they're falling behind. From the outside, their stories look almost identical. Yet one carries those years like a sentence, searching every memory for proof they weren't enough. The other carries those same years like a foundation, recognizing that every wrong turn quietly refined the person they eventually became. The facts are identical. The meaning is completely different. And the meaning you give your past quietly shapes the future you're willing to create. Maybe delayed success was never about arriving after everyone else. Maybe it was about refusing to spend your life becoming someone who looked impressive but never felt like you. One day your outer life finally catches up with your inner compass. When that happens, it doesn't feel like you've discovered yourself. It feels like you've finally stopped abandoning yourself. So if this conversation helped you see your own story differently, I'd love for you to stay with us by subscribing. Leave a like if you recognized yourself somewhere in these ideas, and share this video with someone who might still believe they're trapped in that invisible waiting room. Because sometimes the greatest gift isn't giving someone new advice. It's helping them realize the door they feared was locked has been waiting for them to turn the handle all along. And before you go, I'd genuinely love to hear your answer to one question. Looking back on your life, which season once felt like wasted time, but now feels like it was quietly preparing you for the person you're becoming?